So in this lesson, we're going to add a custom timeline. By that I mean this exact bar here. And then we're also going to add the ability to scrub, which means dragging the timeline to a position of our choosing. Now inside of our div of player controls, underneath the button, we're going to create a new div and give it a class of player underscore underscore, and this is going to be called the progress. So this is going to hold two things. First, it's going to hold the duration, so something like this where we have 0:05 and 0:11, and it's also going to hold our custom bar. Now for this, we're going to use an input with a type of range. So this will be nice if you haven't seen this before. This will be a fairly nice use case to introduce the range. Now as well, we're going to give this a class of player underscore underscore timeline. And if we quickly save this out, we can just see what we are in fact working with. So you can see here that we have some kind of volume looking slider, which is blue by default. And this will, depending on what browser you're using, be looking slightly different in each browser. Now we can actually override these styles, and I'm going to, but I'm just going to update the styles for Google Chrome. So if you want to, in the future, add some styles for these types of things, we'll need to use more specific selectors, such as Mozilla Moz selectors, or for example, in Google Chrome, we use the WebKit selectors. Now you can see when I refresh that we have this bar, it starts by default kind of in the middle. So that's by default having a default value. So what we can in fact do is set it to a value of 0 because our video in fact starts at the beginning as well. Now, one thing that we want to do is introduce a minimum and maximum value. So let's go ahead and add these attributes in. Now the maximum we want to create as 100 and the minimum we want to add as 0. Now this is so we can easily take the duration of the video and turn it into an easier to parse and format number by simply dividing the progress by 100, and this will make more sense as we continue. So we'll save this out and you can see that we have our input, it starts at 0 and everything is absolutely fine. Now, if we jump into our style sheet, what I want to do is add some more styles. So we've got our player, we've got the player video, we've got the player controls. Now underneath there, we're going to say player underscore, and this is then going to be our progress. So we want to neaten this up slightly. Now this is going to have a value of flex 1, and we're also going to display flex inside of that as well. So when we save this out, at the moment we're not going to see too much difference. But as we add further elements, we'll start to see this layout come into effect. Now inside of the player progress, we have our range input. So what we can in fact do is override some of the styles for this, which is our player timeline. Now we could target our player timeline directly. However, we are going to be using the same styles for a custom volume. You can see that our volume essentially is what looks like an input type range. So for this, we're going to use an input with a type of range as the value. Now we can say WebKit appearance with a value of none. Appearance can also be none. We can give it a nice height of 8 pixels, a border radius of 5 pixels. We're going to then give it a width of 100%. Outline can also be 0. Now the background color, I want to use a nice gray, so we're going to use F1, F2 and F5, which we've already got in our style sheet. And finally, we're going to create a border bottom, which is going to be 2 pixels solid and D2D 5DA as we have here. So let's save this out and check out what we have. Now this looks quite nice. It gives us a nice on-brand gray volume bar. However, we have this blue circle, our input type range slider, and we can actually target that as well. So let's also say input type equals range. Now what we need to do is use a more advanced selector. So for this, we can say dash WebKit, dash slider, and you can see that we have this dash thumb. So we want to use the same WebKit appearance and say none. We can use appearance none as well, which is the more standard approach. We'll set this to a nice white background and then use a box shadow value of 0.04 pixels with an RGBA, which we'll just use as black for now and set a slight opacity on. We can then set a width and also a height of both 14 pixels. Now to make it nice and round, we'll also use a border radius. And for this, to create a nice circle, we can use 50%. So here you can see that we have a nice white slider. This is going to be the exact same for our volume. But what we essentially want to achieve in this video is when we start playing this video, you can see how this is moving along, but ours actually doesn't do anything. So can you think at this point what we in fact need to do? Let's jump out of our CSS and we're going to jump back into our JavaScript file because we want to start introducing some of those events on our media object. So first things first, let's go and grab a reference to our timeline. I'm going to call this the timeline equals, and we can say player, query selector, and we want to go and grab our player underscore timeline. That's then going to give us access to our input type range so we can start setting the values on it. And this will make more sense as we actually start updating them based on some of the media values. So this will be really nice for us. Because these are our behavioral events, we want to then start hooking into some of the events coming from our media object. So here we can say media, add event listener. Now the event that we want to listen to is in fact our time update. And at this point, we're going to call a function called set duration. So let's grab our set duration. So what we'll do above our click events is say const set duration equals a new function. Now, if you remember, we get an event object coming through here. So let's have a look at our event. We can say .target, and we're going to look at the current time as well as the duration. So let's save this out. We've got a timeline constant above, which I'm just going to comment out for now. We'll go back and press play. So I'll play and stop. You can see that we have our duration, which is then increasing. So what we can essentially do is take the value and set it along our timeline as the video is in fact playing. So if we were to do something like this, the current time divided by the duration, you can start to see this as a decimal. So what we can in fact do is convert it to a percentage. So you can see here that I'm 4 seconds in and it's 11 seconds. So it's almost 0.4. So it's 36% of the way through the video. So instead of doing a console log, we can actually grab the current progress that's happened. And to get our percentage, we can then multiply it by 100. So let's say console.log and log out that progress. We'll go back, and if you watch this as the video continues, when it reaches the end, we should hit 100%. So there we go, we now have 100. And you may be asking, why are we doing this with 100? And that is because if you have a look in our input type range, we've actually set a minimum and a maximum value. So the steps here are going to be 0 to 100. So our input range is actually catered for already the ability to handle this percentage that we have. So what that simply means is we can uncomment our constant of timeline, and all we want to do is just set the value of our timeline. So let's jump down, and instead of just logging the progress, we can say timeline.value equals that progress constant. We'll save this out. We should hopefully see this start to move along in time with our video. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It's quite a nice feature using this input type of range. We've talked about minimum and maximum values. We've set an initial value, and this then allows us to implement our own custom timeline. Now at the moment you can see that we cannot actually scrub this video by dragging this. However, we can when we drag up in the actual video. And you can see that our custom implementation is actually keeping up because it's firing those events every time we are dragging. So in the next video, what we're going to do is add the duration where we have this 02 and 011 alongside. So as our video is playing, not only is the input updating, but we'll see the duration increasing as well.